Welcome to What's Next from AgResearch, a podcast exploring science answers to big questions. I'm Erin. I work at AgResearch, but I'm not a scientist. I do have a lot of questions, and I thought that you might too. In this episode, I'm asking if biosecurity even matters, and if it does, how far are we prepared to go to prevent a biosecurity catastrophe? KPMG's annual Agribusiness Leaders Priority Survey has had world-class biosecurity at the top of its results every year since it began 13 years ago, reflecting just how much our rural sector recognises biosecurity is crucial to New Zealand's success. The report highlights the likely arrival of bird flu as a key concern. It's arrived in Antarctica, and in the US, it's jumped into cattle herds. With Mycoplasma bovis not yet a distant memory, it's not a huge surprise that people are a bit nervous about it. In addition, foot and mouth disease is getting a bit closer. It's being managed currently in Indonesia. Estimates in 2014 put the economic impact of an outbreak in New Zealand costing somewhere about $13 billion. And pastoral agriculture is uniquely vulnerable to a wider range of invasive pests when you compare it to, say, forestry or horticulture. And that's because of the layers of soil, the pasture, the livestock involved in producing our food. They're all entry points for pests and diseases. Biologist, immunologist and animal scientist Axel Heiser is AgResearch's chief scientist. He started out as a cancer researcher, but he jumped into animal research so that he could come to New Zealand. Axel, hi.
Hi, Erin. Thanks for having me.
I guess our most recent example of animal biosecurity is very fresh in our minds, M. bovis. What do you reckon we've learnt from that experience?
We learned that it is very important to be prepared, and we were prepared in regard to having a response plan, at least in general, lined up. And we learned that we can't avoid these incursions completely. This was not on any list of potential emerging diseases. Until today, we don't know exactly how it came in. But we know that we've beat it basically, and we are the first country in the world that did so.
And that's a big deal, isn't it?
I think it is. It shows how powerful a quick and good and decisive response can be.
So looking to the future, how do we avoid something like M. bovis in the future?
I think we need to be vigilant at the border. That's whatever comes into the country needs to be clean and controlled. And we need to make sure that we are prepared for response. So if something comes in, that we know what to do and how to contain it. If you look at the return on investment in biosecurity, your outside of New Zealand and border return is, for every dollar you spend, you can save $100. And if you look at containment, it's I think it's $10 per dollar. Once it's spread, it's a dollar for dollar. So we need to put our effort in these early times.
And so outside of that, what do you think our risk areas are, or perhaps our most likely next issue?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, and we're actually trying to put together a research program around that to make some predictions around what might be coming. There's the aspect of global warming and how that changes how New Zealand might receive new incursions. Top of the list, probably in animal biosecurity, is foot and mouth disease, FMD. Just because the impact would be so huge.
And so in terms of impact, I mentioned just before, about a $13 billion cost was what they estimated 10 years ago in terms of the cost to the country in our response. But it wouldn't just be that, would it?
No. So the day it gets detected within New Zealand, minus 20 days, that's where all the exports of meat end, and likely our milk exports as well. And for as long as it takes to eradicate it, plus a time frame to make sure that we're FMD free. So this is a huge impact to our industry, which is, by the way, the backbone of our entire economy. So it would hit us very, very hard.
So we're sort of talking in the vicinity of tens of billions, aren't we here? Billions with the B.
Yes. So we're talking probably $30 to $50 billion a year lost to the economy.
Ouch. Right. So very important that we do the things that we can do. So a lot of that has to do with border vigilance. Tell me a bit about border biosecurity.
Yeah. So as I said, the effects you can have by having a strong border biosecurity are the most efficient ones. And the way it's set up for New Zealand is like a Swiss cheese. That sounds strange, but if you cut a Swiss cheese into slices, then each slice might have a hole. And you want the border to be permeable. You want tourists to come in, you want us to be able to leave and come back, and you want imports to come in. But if you put the slices back together, then the cheese itself is a pretty solid block. And that's how we see the borders biosecurity. Each single step might be slightly permeable, but altogether it is pretty solid.
So in terms of the whole picture, do you think we're doing enough? Is there anything we need to lift our game on, do you reckon?
I think in regard to border biosecurity, I think we're doing really well. The people that come into the country seem to understand the importance of it mostly. So that's good. Within the country, I think since Mycoplasma bovis, we're doing a lot better. To me, the main thing is animal tracing, using the NATE system to make sure that we know which animal is going where, so that once we have an incursion, we can find the infected animals as quickly as possible.
And it's not just about what's outside the country, though, is it? There's already infectious diseases that are here. Does that have an impact?
I personally think, of course, infectious diseases in animals cost us a lot of money. Any farmer that had to deal with mastitis or endometritis or over pneumonia in sheep knows what that means and what it can cost. I think we are absolutely greatly underestimating the cost of this, because there's what we call subclinical disease, which means the animals are sick, but they are not obviously sick. They are not showing any signs. It's like us having the sniffles and still going to work, but not putting in the full effort because we're a bit weak. So these animals produce a little less meat and milk. But across our millions of animals, that can make a big difference. So there's a gain to be made from animal health that I count under biosecurity.
Okay. So if I'm a farmer, I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of pressures on farmers at the moment from all kinds of directions, and it can feel pretty tough. But you're not suggesting necessarily more work, just doing it at a different time, that sort of paying attention at a different time?
Yes. I mean, that's whenever I talk to farmers, they know exactly which animal diseases are their main concerns, but animal diseases in general are not very high on the list because there are all these other problems that farmers face. With the desire to raise healthy, happy animals, the farmers already do a lot that plays in our favor. And then having a solid vaccination program for the animals helps. As I said before, controlling the movements helps. And then there are little things you can do. Not moving sheep across dusty roads helps because the dust increases the risk to develop pneumonia. Keeping your farm equipment clean, especially if you move it between farms or between paddocks, and all these things that are similar to washing your hands when you have the flu.
So small actions that can pay off, that don't cost much now, but can pay off later. Yes. So just going back to not moving sheep across a dusty road because you can increase the risk of pneumonia. What say I'm somewhere that's drought prone, and let's face it, there are places across the country that definitely experience that in many summers. Is that something like, could you wet the ground before they walk, that sort of thing?
For example, that is, if that's possible, then that's a way to reduce the risk for the herd to develop pneumonia.
Okay, so little steps can pay off. That's great. I mentioned bird flu or avian influenza, if we're going to be all science about it earlier. Is that a threat to us? What do you think it might mean here?
It's currently hard to tell. It certainly has jumped from birds into cattle. The large numbers of dairy cattle in the US are infected now, and the virus has found out how to jump from cow to cow and not just from birds to cows. And it has learned to jump from cows to people. So there's a human health aspect to it. it's not making the animals terribly sick. It's hitting productivity a little bit. So we are a little unsure about how big of an issue it is. It's certainly not comparable to FMD, but it's also certainly preferable not to have it. Yeah.
And I suppose it will come in on birds, and they are the one area in the chain that we cannot control, right?
Exactly. That's all it takes is a wild bird that comes into the country and lands on the wrong farm and infects the cow.
So if we get this into one of our herds, do we know what the impact is in terms of on the milk, or if, say, the cow was pregnant? Do we know sort of how it impacts them that way?
It's currently, if you have a well-fed, otherwise healthy animal, then it is like a flu for us, and it will for a short time impact the milk production. But in the long run, for now, we think it won't have a big impact. But the virus is adapting and learning and evolving, and it might become worse over time. And we wanted to keep it out so we can sell our product as avian flu, bird flu free, of course.
How will we know that it's here? What, if I was a farmer, what should I be looking for? Because I guess we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah, that's the tricky part, and that's true for several of the diseases that could come in. The key will be early detection. So having a look at your animals, know your animals, recognize when something is wrong, when they behave differently, when they just show signs of disease, get your vet in, and then the vet will know if that needs a notification to MPI or not.
So it sounds like vigilance, and it sounds like vigilance is the answer to almost all of these questions right through the sort of when we're thinking about biosecurity. And it's not just farmers who need to be vigilant. It's sort of all of us if we're coming back from holiday. It's, making sure you tick the right boxes on the form on the plane and all of those sorts of things. And if you've got people visiting you, making sure that they know to take it seriously. Like you said, most people seem to understand that because we're this lovely little island, we've a bit of a fortress as far as a lot of things are concerned. But, how is it really a threat for me to have dirt on my shoes?
Yes, that's one thing that literally truckloads of dirt come into, or soil, as my soil scientist colleague prefer to call it. There are truckloads of soil coming into the country on shoes from travelers, and each of these can carry a pathogen that devastates our industry.
So we all need to be really careful.
It is, yes, it is, yeah. I remember when I prepared my household to immigrate to New Zealand, I spent almost a week throwing away a lot of things, all the garden tools, everything. I didn't bother, and the rest. Being a scientist, I bleached everything and wrote little notes about what I did before I took it in. And people laughed at me, and I said, well, look at New Zealand. It is disease-free. A lot of our market value comes from being free of many diseases. So let's keep it that way.
Well, thank you for your vigilance. If only everyone was that careful. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you for having me.
It's not just our animals that are at risk. Our plants, including the powerhouse of our economy, pasture, could be hit by biosecurity threats too. Estimates from 2018 put the cost from pasture pests that are already here at around $2.3 billion a year. Barbara Barrett is a Fellow of the Entomological Society of New Zealand, as well as a Fellow of the Royal Society Te Aoparangi, and an Honorary Professor in Botany and Zoology at the University of Otago. Barbara's worked at AgResearch and its predecessors for 46 years and was recently named an Emeritus Scientist, which means she's sort of retired, but just can't get enough of the place, so she's still working. Barbara specialises in risk assessment, and she's the ideal person to explain more about biosecurity when it comes to plants and pasture in New Zealand. Barbara, hi.
Hi, Erin.
When it comes to pests, are we talking about just what happens at the border for New Zealand?
No, we're also talking about what's already here that might have insects and weeds that might have been here for some time, and those that do actually get past the border on occasions. MPI do an amazing job of keeping things out, and they're increasingly called upon to ramp up, those efforts. But, inevitably things will get through either through the border or indeed blow over from Australia, as we've had an example of that recently.
And it obviously isn't just about what's out there that has yet to get here either, is it?
No, as I say, it's what's already here and established in our pastures or other crop systems that are causing economic losses to farmers. So it's what could still come in, as well as what's already here causing problems. And as you said, there's huge losses because of pests that are already in the country.
And so thinking about both external and internal, is one a bigger problem than the other, or is it we've got to be vigilant on both fronts?
Oh, absolutely vigilant on both fronts. Money spent on preventing pests getting into New Zealand is obviously a better investment than having to deal with them when they're here. Prevention is better than cure. We all know that. So a small investment in stopping something coming in is going to have greater economic returns than money spent on controlling something year after year after year that's already here.
So when we're thinking about external pests coming in, is there anything that sort of leaps out to you as something that's a big threat that we're really lucky not to have yet?
Well, yes, the obvious one that leaps out is brown marmorated stink bug, BMSB, we call it for short, for obvious reasons. It is a large hemipteran bug that is spreading throughout the world in other countries, and it causes huge economic losses. It's got a very, very wide host range, everything from orchard crops to grapes to other fruit crops, berry crops. I mean, it's got a massive, and it would include New Zealand native species as well. So that's something we really, really don't want.
And what about the things that are already here? What are the things that sort of worry you about doing damage to us?
Well, we've got lots of pests that are already here that we've been working on for a number of years. Some we've managed to reduce the impact more than others. We've used biological control in some instances that's been highly successful in reducing the impacts of pests in some of our forage crops. And there are others that seem to be a bit more intractable. Some of a couple of native species, for example, grass grub and perina, they're New Zealand native species that have responded really well to the pasture species that we've brought in from Europe, mainly. They're highly nutritious, and those pests do really well on those. And although we do have so we've developed some good methods for reducing the impact of those. They're still there, and we still have outbreaks, and farmers still suffer losses because of those.
And am I right in thinking that climate change is already having an impact on these sorts of things, and it's going to continue to do that? What do you think the threats could be in the future?
Well, we're already seeing movement of insect pests, for example, south to the more southern parts of New Zealand where we've never seen them before. So that's going to increase. One of our big worries is that the biological control programs that we've got that are working well at the moment may become uncoupled. So, the pests might respond differently to climate change than the control agent, say a parasitoid, and we might be sort of back to square one because those relationships have been broken and uncoupled, and those sorts of things we need to start looking at really soon to predict what is likely to happen in the future and, get ahead of the game.
So just to go back, when you're talking about biocontrols, that's an alternative to, say, pesticides. So you're using natural enemies for things. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes, biological control is if we have a pest comes into New Zealand from another country, then what happens is if we decide to go ahead with a biocontrol agent, we go to the country of origin of the pest, find out what's attacking it there in its natural environment, and try and select some that are going to be safe in New Zealand. That's the key thing, and that's what I've spent quite a bit of my career looking at is trying to help improve our confidence that something we might introduce into the environment here to control a pest is actually going to be safe and not attack other species, our native species, for example. So biocontrol, it can be very, very effective. And obviously, once it's here, there's no further costs. So you don't have ongoing costs as you do with pesticides. Pesticides are something we're definitely trying to reduce use of, for obvious reasons. And biological control can be a very good alternative. So we've put a lot of effort into biological control in recent years.
And you've talked about sleeper weeds. So tell me more about what you mean by a sleeper weed.
Well, this is something that a plant that's already here that may not be a problem at the moment. It might be sitting happily in somebody's backyard, producing beautiful flowers, etc. But if the climate changes or other things change to benefit that plant, it might then spread out of control and become what we call a weed. A weed is, classically defined as a plant that's growing in the wrong place. So if it's no longer just in your garden, but all through pastures, forests, or whatever, then then becomes a weed. And so sleeper weeds are ones that are already here but haven't yet realised their full potential, or it might take climate change to help them realise their full potential.
So it seems like a lot of the work in this kind of area is about being prepared. Do you think that we're doing enough?
We can always do more. There's no doubt about that. For example, farmers can be extra ears and eyes in the biosecurity area. Farmers on the lookout for new things that appear, new pests, new weeds. That can be really helpful. And so just sort of encouraging farmers to be observant and to report anything they see. That's one good way to be prepared. And also in the pest management area, it's really useful if farmers can be, in our research programs, we've developed several ways in which farmers can predict pests before they reach the outbreak stage. But it's quite hard to get farmers sometimes to actually implement these early warning systems or ways of having sort of being able to predict that something's going to become pest in, say, 3 or 4 months. It's quite hard it's a bit like putting off going to the doctor if you think it's going to be bad news. Very similar sort of thing, let's not go and sort of find out if this looks like it might be a problem, because then I'm going to have to spend a lot of money dealing with it, etc. But actually, if you deal with it early, it's going to cost less. So we really encourage farmers to use the sorts of early warning systems that are available. In the pest management area, we're actually quite under-resourced at the moment. There's not a lot of research going on that's funded into pest management. So we do need resources, more resources for pest management research. And at the moment, we're really not able to make the progress in this sort of area that we would like to.
So AgResearch is involved with something called B3. Can you tell me a bit more about that and what it does?
Yes, B3, the full name is Better Border Biosecurity, so you can see why we call it B3, is a research collaboration between 4 Crown Research Institutes. So AgResearch that we are in is one. Also Plant and Food Research, Scion, that's Forestry Research Institute, and Manaki Whenua Landcare Research are all contributing in a partnership where we can put best teams together from across all of those CRIs to address biosecurity issues. And the other real benefit of B3 is that we have developed a very close relationship with our end users, mainly MPI, the EPA, Environmental Pest Management Authority, Ministry of Primary Industries, and Department of Conservation. 3 of our end users, along with some of the producers, the industry. And we work closely with them so that we understand their research priorities. We can put research projects into place around those priorities so that we're addressing exactly what they need, and we keep in contact with them as the research goes along, report on progress and any changes that need to be made, and make sure that the research we do can actually be implemented by the end users so we can really make a difference in how they do things, improve the way that they can do their jobs. So that's really, this research collaboration has really achieved those outcomes. And I think, it's a lesson to be learned in how research could be done to really be able to put these sort of multidisciplinary, multi-agency teams together to get the best possible outcomes.
New Zealanders sometimes have a bit of a she'll be right attitude to things. Is biosecurity an area where we're sometimes prone to that?
Well, you're right. New Zealand does have a bit of can have a bit of a lax approach to things. I don't think you could say that it's really true of the biosecurity area. More and more resources are being put into biosecurity by the government, into NPI. They're the ones who do most of this work in trying to prevent things from coming in. With faced with possible incursions like BMSB, then they've done a magnificent job of keeping that out, and there certainly hasn't been a she'll be right attitude there at all. I think we've learned a lot over the years. We are smarter. I think we realise how much there is to be lost from the examples we've had of things that have come into New Zealand, and I think probably it's in the pest management area, as I mentioned before, where farmers sort of hope that something's not going to become a pest in their particular paddock. We know that in, say, 3 years after a new pasture is sown, then our farmer in certain parts of the country are likely to get a piranha outbreak. That's a caterpillar that's native that comes up at night and feeds on pasture. We can predict that's likely to happen. And we can say to farmers, look, if it's in the pasture's in its third year, you can go out and actually there are ways of monitoring whether piranha is likely to be a problem early in the season rather than waiting until it actually becomes. That's where I think the she'll be right attitude has been a little bit prominent, and that could be fixed.
Like you mentioned earlier, though, am I right in thinking that if you go out earlier in the season and check for that, I'm assuming that will save you money because you won't have to use any chemical controls later, or, you can get on top of it a bit quicker?
That's exactly right, yeah. So having early warning can certainly save you money in control costs later on when it might be too late anyway. Because often by the time you see the damage actually happening in the pasture and you go, oh my God, what am I going to do now? It means it's either going to have to be pesticides, which you probably don't want to use, which are going to be expensive, and where it's probably too late to have the best benefit anyway.
So what I'm hearing is there are steps that we can all take that help in this space, and one of the key things is actually paying attention, being vigilant.
Yes, absolutely. And, I think kids in particular are always sort of looking at creepy crawlers and, they're closer to the ground. Somebody said to me once, I thought that was quite funny. So they see these things they can often be very observant in seeing things that are new, that they haven't seen before, and taking it to their parents and saying, look, Dad, I haven't seen this bug before. Do you think it might be something that, should be reported, or something new? Should we report this? And I think MPI would rather have over-reporting of things that are not new than miss out on things that could be reported that are new. Gardeners as well, a group of people who are very observant and will see things on their plants in their garden, and they could be a really useful resource in observing new things and reporting new things.
AgResearch works to enhance the value, productivity and profitability of New Zealand's pastoral agriculture to contribute to economic growth and beneficial environmental and social outcomes. To find out more about our work and how we can help you, visit us at agresearch.co.nz/podcast or click the link in our show notes.